What's up, everybody? This is Speaking Llama, a Survivor podcast, and we're coming at you with a special episode covering Australian Survivor, Heroes versus Villains. Alex, uh, it has been a whirlwind of a week already for Australian Survivor. Typically, we would have been doing an exit interview with the most recent person voted out of Australian Survivor, but unfortunately, they were not available today to do those interviews. Seems like they are under the weather. Hope they get better soon. But we didn't want to go another moment without talking about what is arguably the most wild, best tribal council, not just in Australian Survivor, but in Survivor history. And so, normally we do these recap episodes and we kind of, cover the basics, but let's dive deep into this because I think what we saw in episode 7 is worth that. So we're here to do a deep dive. Yes, Alex.
Are we going to dive deep or dig deep?
This is Australian Survivor, so Jeff Probst isn't here.
Okay. And we're all grateful for JLP, right?
We are all grateful for JLP. But yeah, let's talk about episode 7's Tribal Council. It is one of the most spectacular things I've ever seen. Maybe one of the most well performed moves in the moment that we have seen. But I have a couple of disclaimers before we kind of really get into this. For those that maybe need a refresher, I don't know how you have forgotten already, but episode 7's Tribal Council saw the villains going to Tribal Council, in which it looked like Simon was going to get blindsided because his best mate Jordy spilled the beans, and this is why you never tell anybody about your advantages. But Simon wins a spur-of-the-moment immunity mid-tribal, and then proceeds what a masterful performance by George of putting a gun to Simon's head and saying, do this or that, otherwise you're done. And it was a lose-lose situation for Simon, but it ultimately saw Fraser go home. What a wild tribal council. But yes, Alex, a couple disclaimers. We saw 40 minutes of this tribal council, right? Which is, if you didn't realize, that's pretty much an entire US Survivor episode.
Absolutely.
But one of the things we have to keep in mind is that even though we saw a lot of tribal council, we still only saw a small segment of that tribal council. This is an edited TV show. I think we saw a lot of personalities and aggression and things that came out. And so when we think about the actions of George and Simon and Stevie and anyone else in that tribal council, we have to remember that this is an edited TV show and we did not see everything. I was sitting there on my couch saying, hey, why aren't you saying X, Y, and Z? Do this. What are you thinking? I wasn't there for, 5-6 hours, however long it was, emotionally drained. And if I was Simon, having, George yell in my ear for what was probably 3 hours straight, which would have been exhausting.
At the end of at least 2 weeks of that. Right?
Right. The culmination of that. So yeah, we just have to kind of keep that in mind as we go with this in particular, because I do think it was one of the best tribal council performances we've ever seen. But let's dive kind of deep into...
Dig deep?
No, dive deep. Alex, what are your thoughts on, or first thoughts on this tribal council?
My first thought right now is, you want me to just turn off my camera and let you go?
Listen, I like a monologue.
When I give you the mic, you take it, man. First thoughts. So this is the first episode we watched together.
Oh yeah.
We lived 3 hours apart. We had a boys' weekend, had some fun, forced our friends to watch it with us. So it was a great episode to watch together. My first thought was, I came to the realization, Caleb, that you watch Survivor with your head and I watch Survivor with my heart.
Is this news? This is not news.
Apparently. I'm too busy feeling, man. So I've never felt so empathetic during a Survivor episode ever. So many emotions were going through my body watching that. So I cannot imagine how any of those 7 felt at that tribal council. That was really my big takeaway. Other takeaway, I think there's a lot of things George did really incredibly with the strategy. Yep. There are some things outside of that strategy that maybe was interwoven that I don't love that he did.
Yeah.
But, we'll get there. And same thing, Simon, I think he was dealt a pretty crappy hand that
Absolutely.
episode. That this season for the most part. But that tribal council in particular, I think for the most part, he did everything he could with that hand that he had. So these 2 guys, okay, we'll get there.
I think thoughts.
I know you've already told me. I think these 2 guys, they demonstrate what is fun about Survivor, a rivalry. Yeah. And I think my favorite thing too was they had a watch party together, I think, or at least they were together when the episode aired, and got in a big T-shirt together. They said get a long T-shirt or something like that. So it's fun to see that too. So
yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, that's kind of your first point. I've always known I watch with my head. That's why I have the better Survivor opinions than you do. You definitely have blinders on, but in this case, I do think
keeping the blinders on.
Yeah, that's true. You will. You never take them off. For the most part, I think Simon was put in a precarious situation by what was going on, and I hope he is. I'm sure he's thankful that there was an immunity challenge and that he crushed it. Like first of all, crushed it. Way to go, Simon.
Can we talk about it too? So fun to see an immunity challenge at a tribal council. I thought that was a really fun twist. And the challenge itself was perfect classic Survivor.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
The jailbreak is just a classic Survivor game or challenge that you need to accomplish to master in order to make these pivotal moves throughout so many seasons of US Survivor and Australian Survivor. And then fire making. And that's fundamental to the game. So I love a good nighttime challenge too. Under the torches, it just, there's a whole different vibe to it. He crushed it. I was standing up, jumping up and down.
Yeah, I can confirm.
You tried to take a picture of me.
You were jumping. Yeah, you wouldn't let me take a photo.
Yeah.
Yeah, so way to go, Simon. And my favorite part of the episode of that challenge was probably Shawnee's stick going through, and it was just it's not, Shawnee, it's not good. You just go and bring it back.
Not it.
So, which I know we didn't see all of it, but I'm surprised. It seemed like Simon, it was far and away.
You're surprised by that?
No one was. I'm surprised that more people weren't better at the challenge. That he had such a lead, it seemed right? We didn't see everything. Yeah. But yeah, so let's talk about we know that Jordy was ready to flip on Simon. And regardless of what Jordy does after this fact, what do we think about the move of Jordy and Fraser deciding, hey, you know what? Simon just has too much heat on him, and he spills the beans to George about this idol that no one knows is not an idol.
Yeah. And for those listening for the first time, Simon is one of my favorite Australian players even before this season. He's my winner pick this season. So again, I'm seeing it through that lens. But I see the intention behind it. Right, of Simon's a sinking ship. And we saw that actually in episode 8, the 2 of them talk, and Jordy was able to explain that, hey, you were going down. I didn't want to go down with you, so I decided to hop over. So I understand that rationale. I think there is a parallel course here where numbers-wise, he's jumping over with Fraser to be the bottom of a 5-person alliance when he was really the top of a 4-person alliance. Yeah. So I don't love that just from a number standpoint. And also this philosophy that we see Shawnee in particular have, and Shawnee and Liz really run with this year, is let's keep George in because everyone is going after George, and he will continuously be the target out front and the shield that we can hide behind because there's so much heat on George.
Yeah.
Could Jordy not say the same thing about Simon? because there's so much heat on Simon. His name's constantly getting brought up. Could he be that shield for Jordy staying behind him? I do feel like the difference at this point in the game, though, is that the villains cannot vote Simon out until the merge is approaching, because they are going to lose just physically to the heroes. So maybe Jordy's a casualty of that. I don't know. He holds his own, though. He made the move. I see why he did it. I think there were a few other rationales, obviously, as an armchair quarterback, to say, like, hey, I don't love it. So I would have liked to see maybe a different strategy there.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder, right, anytime I look at someone or something happens, I'm like, why in the world would you do that? I have to think to myself, what am I not seeing that could be explaining what is happening, whether it's true or not? Like, what are the potential options? And maybe the linchpin in Jordy and Fraser's decision was simply Shawnee and Liz, right? That it does look like they're going over to the bottom of a 5-person alliance, but maybe Shawnee and Liz have convinced them wherever they see the hierarchy stacking up for them, they have convinced Jordy and Fraser, whether true or not, that it'll be them 4 going over, right? That would, for me, explain more of the rationale for Jordy to make the flip, that it's not about going to trust George, but Shawnee and Liz are so fed up with Simon. Those are my 2 potential allies going forward, not George. So whether right or wrong, the other thing I wonder too is, could he have done that move, right, flipping on Simon, without also revealing the advantage, right, to keep that in the right? So it's one thing to tell Simon, hey, the numbers were going your way. I was planning on voting for you. Yeah, I'm sorry, but I didn't know how it was going to go, and you might have played your idol. I was trying to keep my options open.
Yeah.
But right, the nail in the coffin for the Simon and Jordy relationship was the betrayal of trust in that idol non-idol reveal.
Well, and the worst part about it too is that all we know at this point, at the end of episode 8, is it's not an idol. And we don't know what it is, which almost makes it worse, because we saw this immunity challenge in episode 8. George tells all the heroes, yes, Simon has an idol, and he confirms it. So what's bad is having an idol and everyone on the beach knowing it. What is potentially worse is everyone on the beach thinking you have an idol, and you also think you have an idol, and you don't. So that's also not great for Simon's game right now. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting, because I think with maybe any other player, maybe not as intense and strategic as George, I think that doesn't happen, right? It's a clean cut. Hey, I'm swapping over. We're taking out Stevie. We're not having all the 7-hour theatrics of this tribal council. It's a clean break. I don't think George could anticipate. I don't think anyone could anticipate. So it's not on Jordy what George was going to do that tribal council with all the information, right? Maybe Haley could, but like, calm down, Caleb.
I could have.
No, you couldn't.
I did in the moment. Whether I could have after being on the island for 2 weeks.
I also did in the moment,
and tired.
We were sitting next to each other. I looked at you first and said, Fraser's going home.
Let's talk about George in particular, right? He is eccentric. He's always been. Yeah. And in the episode, it kind of looks like he comes up with this plan on the fly, which he did, like, in a sense, come up on the fly, but he probably likely had, an hour, 30 minutes to kind of like think through, all right, how do I make the most out of this situation? Because he could have just played the idol and Stevie gone home and it would have been fine. But what made this move so masterful was the overall outcome of it. Now, I will also say Survivor is a game. And you kind of mentioned, like, this episode, this tribal demonstrates like why Survivor can be so much fun. But also like I was watching George just lay into Simon over and over again to an extent that which like making Simon feel bad for something that George like you are like guilty of and right
Yes.
not showing loyalty or like playing the moral high card when you
Yeah.
don't have that moral high card, right? You put a Simon in a lose-lose situation.
Yeah.
And come and like act like you're the good guy.
Yeah.
And which was the right move,
Yes.
gamesmanship,
Yeah.
right? But was just like hard to watch
Yes.
in the
Well,
moment.
and I think sometimes there's a blurred line between gamesmanship and sportsmanship, right?
Yeah.
You know, when you're doing that, and the genius of George here is post vote
Yes.
with his interaction with Simon and Stevie. That's
Absolutely.
the genius here, because he pinned Simon in a corner where it is a lose-lose situation.
Yep.
Again, we all assume on, we as in the 7 sitting there all assume the idol's real.
Yep.
So you are either forcing Simon to play your idol on Stevie. You now have one ally against, what is that, 4? Yeah, 4 other allies. So 2 versus 4 with no protection, and we're sending you out. Period. Right?
Yep.
Or don't play your idol, save it for yourself. Now it's 5 versus 1. And he obviously, George knows Stevie was going to stay and pin that, but what Simon doesn't know is he assumes Stevie's going to go. So that's the genius right there of let's pin Simon in a corner because he can't win either way.
Yep.
Now, what then elevated it to the masterful plan, the greatest tribal ever, was the third option, which was let's have Simon piss off Stevie and then keep him and isolate Jordy. Now, Jordy has no alliance. Simon has no alliance. Stevie is now coming straight to us. And now it's 4 versus 1 versus 1.
Right. And that was like so masterful. It's like, not only are you blaming, like you're pinning Simon saying, hey, Stevie, he isn't willing to save you.
Yes.
And then, but I am. Right. Like that, like,
but it's like, no. Yeah.
Right. And like, take a step back. It's like, no, George, you knew that Stevie was never in jeopardy. You just trying to drive a wedge between Stevie and Simon. And to your credit, it worked. And right. So, and like, you could look at like, why not take Jordy out? Like, he's a flipper. Now, like kind of like you said, Jordy has no alliance, at least with Simon. He can only go to you 4 or you 3, and you can decide if you want to work with him or not.
Well, and the closer, I mean, Jordy was the one who gave the information away from Simon. Those two were they seem to be the figurehead of that side of the alliance. So, the stronger they are, the harder they fall. And so it's going to be more chaos if Jordy's there with having to answer to Simon compared to Fraser answering to Simon. One thing I was thinking, in George's, one of George's many monologues, similar to yourself, after the vote was, see what I did there, full circle. After the vote was, my question was like, okay, George, you're wanting Simon to play the idol for Stevie.
Yep.
Right. That's what you're pinning on Simon. You got to do this to save Stevie. Yep. Simon, I'll work with you. And it's like, where was the pause to go, wait, so if Simon does play it on Stevie, who goes home? Because we assume it was, 2 votes versus George, 5 votes versus Stevie. And if they both play idols, there was no discussion of like, all right, on the revote, who goes home? Because George can't, Simon can't, and Stevie can't. Yeah. And so I wish there was a ping in Fraser or Jordy's mind of like, oh, we just screwed up. Because they were then going to be the ones to take the shot. And I just wish there was that question was raised. Maybe it was. Like, see, we only saw a small snippet of that. Last thing I'll say, one thing we've said about George, at least one thing we've said on our podcast, if you don't listen to us, subscribe, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, quick plug. We do weekly recaps. Week 1 and week 2, we talked a lot about George's subtle digs at Simon. Just, little bit here, a little bit here, both to the heroes tribe, to other people, to Simon in particular. I know if I'm Simon, I would be ready to burst just with anger if that's 14 days of pestering in my mind from George. But what I did not appreciate was like, as soon as Simon kind of dishes it back to George, that's when it's like, he's kind of playing the victim again. Why would you say that? You're going too far, all this stuff. And even George made that very calm statement at the beginning of the tribal council of, Jonathan, I've done everything I've ever wanted in Survivor, and my question sitting on the couch was, well, you didn't win. And then when Simon goes, well, you didn't win, it's like, thank you. and then to pin that on Simon, throw it in his face, and then the rest of the night just, well, you didn't make the merge, blah, blah, like on and on and on. So playing this victim down here when you've been doing it all game, and then once everyone goes to vote, you pull out your idol, you're swinging it around your head, calling yourself a king, and then just laying into everybody. That's when it's like, hey man, like, you can be great at strategy, you can put on a show, but just that difference of, victimization versus bully was like a 180 in my mind. Now, we don't know George, he's playing a character. We know that, I'm sure he's a great guy outside the game. I just did not appreciate that moment in there.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessary.
That's fair. And I think one of the things, like I mentioned on a podcast previously, was that we have noticed that anytime like George has something to say, anytime Simon does something, George has something to say about it to somebody else. And in part, we're being shown that because that's the story, the culmination of this moment of the tribal council, right? Like that was important towards that story. And Simon could have been kind of like demeaning to George at time based off of the previous season. That could be true. It could also be true that George was taking any small comment, anything to like dig into a perception of Simon for the rest of the tribe, which like demonstrates his like understanding of the long game, right? Like the part of what happened here in this tribal is a result of the first 2 weeks of the game, right? And so you cannot like it, but it was great gameplay.
100%. His strategy was incredible. Yeah. And again, I'm subjective. So
you are subjective. The last thing I'll say about like kind of George's gameplay too, right? Because you could look at this and think, why did George play his idol, right? He knew, he probably had a good guess that he knew where all the votes were going and that there were going to be 3 on Stevie and that was going to be go home, right? Him playing his idol does kind of 2 things. Two things with Stevie in particular, right? It shows, hey, I'm playing my idol. I'm potentially forcing Simon to play his, and I'm showing Stevie that I'm willing to do what it takes, right? Like, so even if the idol play has nothing to do with the actual votes, it has everything to do with building that bond with Stevie.
Yes. And I mean, we love saying, let's maximize advantages.
You love saying that.
I love saying that. And what's interesting about this was the best play for George's idol at this tribal was not negating the most amount of votes at the tribal. It was causing fear and paranoia and trust, which we saw next episode. Again, we've seen episode 8 now. He earned that trust from Stevie because of that.
Yeah.
And he broke the trust with Jordy and between Jordy and Simon. So that idol changed the entire villains camp in George's favor, to the point where if they didn't think there was a tribe swap, those 3, Shawnee, Liz, and George, they're making it to the merge no matter what, because now it's 4 versus 2. There are, maybe 3 to 4 eliminations before the merge.
Yeah.
We then take out Simon, take out Jordy, take out Stevie. And hey, us 3 versus 11 heroes or whatever it is.
Which good luck to that, anyways. Well, let's talk about kind of the other big player in this tribal council, and that is Simon. You mentioned earlier that you thought he made the most out of his situation. I would agree to that to an extent. Like, he was in a lose-lose situation, because if he doesn't play his idol, which is what happened, he potentially loses a relationship with Stevie, or like, right, if Stevie goes home, right, that's, he's still in the same situation pretty much regardless if Stevie goes home or not. But also, I don't have an idol now,
Yeah.
right? Like, and that was the other thing I would say about George too. Like, what was, right? He pitched to Simon that I'm willing to work with you going forward. I make deals with people. Whether he would have or not is a moot point. It then gave George the option to actually play that way, right? Like he would have had an option to play with Simon too, and like demonstrate, and then he would use that eventually and say, "Look, I was off against with Simon the whole time, and then I made a deal, and we working together now."
Yeah.
But with Simon in particular, lose-lose situation. Had he plays his idol, the very first confessional we would have gotten from Jordy, or not from Jordy, but from George, this episode would have been, "Can you believe how stupid Simon is?" Right?
Yes.
Like, I made him play his idol. So like, it was a lose-lose situation. Keep that bad boy in your pocket.
Yeah. Give yourself again, another day.
As
that's it.
As a clarifier, it's not an idol, but I'm calling it an idol because we think it is. He thinks it is. The only thing I would say that Simon could have done differently, and that would have made it the best possible situation for him in a very bad, like, right, this is negative either way. And I think maybe the biggest mistake that I saw with the small part of tribal council that we saw was when he made the comment to Stevie, "Somebody's got to go."
Yeah.
Like, that was I guess there's one other comment I'll make, but it painted a picture of like, Stevie, I don't care if you go home, right? Someone's got to go home. So if it's you, it's you, right? Just like not even having to say that, like,
which, like you said, did he say more? Did he not say more?
Right.
The edit has really shown Simon in a negative light for 8 episodes now. And, we can vouch. We've only been shown kindness from Simon when we've interacted with him. So, it feels counter. There's definitely more conversation there. But I agree with you. I think in a clear head after not a 7-hour tribal council where George is laying into you for at least 5 of those hours, I think you think more clearly and you're a little bit more sad to see him go, and a little bit more rational. And hey, look, like, this is what George is doing. He's trying to pit us against each other. I wish I could do anything. I can't. I would be the first out. I'm really sorry, man. Like, I wanted to go further with you. I hate this. I didn't vote you out. You know where my vote is. These guys voted you out. Remember that. Like, there's a lot more there, because I think Stevie's reaction is really interesting to me.
Yeah.
Because he immediately believes George and runs to George and says, I'm with you guys now. But it's like, yeah, but George and Shawnee and Liz were the ones that orchestrated all of that. If you look a little bit beyond that, Simon said that to you. He broke your trust because he wouldn't use his idol to save you, which you probably shouldn't anyway. But who is the one kind of orchestrating that whole thing? Like, if I'm anyone at that tribal council, I look at George and say, I can't work with that. I don't want to work with that.
Absolutely. I think the other question too, you brought it up earlier, is where was the conversation around, okay, if I play my idol for Stevie,
who's home?
Who's going home?
Who are we voting out, George?
Right. And I hope that question was asked. It didn't seem like it was, because if I'm Jordy and Fraser, I'm telling Stevie, like, hey, or I'm telling, Simon, don't do this, because we're probably going home. And that's the other comment I'll make that Simon could have done. And again, like, it's you're tired, you're exhausted, it's emotionally drained, is pointed out to Stevie, to everyone, there is no way George leaves this up to chance on whether or not I play an idol. Stevie, you are not going home. And if you go home, I'll make it up to you out of this game. But there is no way George voted for you. It's going against somebody else. Like, he's not leaving this up to my decision.
Yeah.
And
that would have been incredible if Simon predicted that. And obviously George would say, no, and would try to back out of it and talk his way out of it. Right. But then we would get there and see the votes being read. and it would come true that, George had lied about that, Simon was telling the truth. I think that would have really changed the dynamics a little bit coming after that tribal council. Yeah. So,
which maybe he did say that,
yeah,
right? Like,
right.
and we just didn't see it.
Absolutely. So I'll believe that. That's fine.
Yeah, that's just my one. Go ahead, Alex.
Go for it, man. I'm changing the subject. Just go.
Okay. That's my big kind of question is like, it goes back to like, who else is going home then? George isn't going to leave this up to chance. He's pitting everybody against us. I'm going to play it like this. And that's where I go back to like the comment about Simon saying someone's got to go to Stevie. That's why like it looks so bad. It's like someone's got to go, but George isn't leaving this up to chance, right? He's too good at this game to do so. And so like, it's why Simon was in a lose-lose situation.
Yeah.
And so really it was just about making the most out of the situation he was in.
Yeah. Well, okay. My question for you, and this is my last question for you, because I know this is a little special edition. So here to wrap it up soon. You asked the question in the intro of, is this the greatest tribal council of the Survivor franchise worldwide?
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know. Kaleb, what do you think?
I told my wife earlier when I told her we were doing a special episode, I was like, here, this is why. Mm-hmm. Some people are calling it the best tribal council of all time. I don't know that I'm ready to say that just yet. I will definitely say I can confidently claim it as in the top 5.
For sure.
Arguably the top 3.
I would say top 3. Yeah.
The only things like I can think of that are potentially better. Like, I really love the double idol play by Parvati in Heroes versus Villains. That was exceptional. I love the fans versus favorite, Eric giving up immunity, and like how, right? What makes this stand out is that Eric immunity thing and fans versus favorite was over the course of several hours. Right, kind of like building it in. This was, I mean, regardless of how long George had to think of this, it was still fairly on the fly.
Yeah.
And like it's the aftermath that George got everything he wanted. Yeah. In the right. Well, not everything. If he would have gotten the idol out, that would have been everything that he had wanted.
Right.
So yeah, it's close.
Yeah. Well, and even to that point, the build up, it's the build up of 7 episodes. Episode 1, Villains Camp. You see Simon go, Jordy, I think we have a cockroach problem. It's the first thing you hear from the villains. Yeah. And then episode 1, George gets medevaced. He's probably the target of the first tribal council.
Well, according to Michael, he was.
Right. He's safe. Now he starts making some room. We see Shawnee really episode 2 make some huge moves and really and then we start seeing George start to undercut Simon a little bit more. And it's just building to even what I thought the most tense interaction of that kind of cutting Simon down was episode 7, where, he's like, Simon's like, I think getting into a Speedo or something like that and about to head out to the water. And George goes, oh, Simon, are you going for a swim? And Simon just, what does it look like? And then you see, he starts freaking out. Liz starts getting frustrated. And it's like, it's the culmination of all that pinned with these 2 players. And even within that, what was going to be a heated tribal council was then flipped on its head when there's an immunity challenge in the middle of it. And Simon, the target, wins. So it's still it's back and forth. And yeah, I think it was by far one of the best of all time. I still love the David and Matt All-Stars one, but that was such a small scale compared to this scale. The other thing too is that was 2 rivals coming together to secretly work together. This was 2 rivals battling it out together, becoming bigger rivals at the end of it. So but definitely I would say probably best in Australian Survivor for sure. That double idol may that flip the entire Heroes versus Villains game in US Survivor.
And just like the perception, just of how well she read it, the dynamics at play now, and she gets an idol from Russell, right? So the point is that I will have to do some deep reflection on whether or not it is the greatest tribal council of all time. But I can confidently say I think I'm with you now. It is definitely top three. Maybe I would even say top two. I don't know that I can come up with many better, more than one better than it. It was excellent. Well, Alex, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
And we have to see how it ages, right?
Yeah.
We see the implications of episode 8 at the beginning, but then villains win, and now episode 9, right now that hasn't aired yet, we do know there's a tribe swap. So, will they be on the same tribe? Will they not be? Is it still good? Are they going to come together at the merge? Is one of them going to go home? Are they both going to go home pre-merge? It's just, it could result in even more down the road, or that could be the end of it. So I think we will have to wait to see the whole season and give it a couple years, see how it ages a little bit. Heroes vs. Villains US was 2010. So that was 13 years ago and still holding up. How will this hold up 13 years from now? I think we need to see the rest of the season to find out.
That's a fair point. Well, with that, I think we kind of said this was going to be a 15-20-minute episode.
You said it.
Texted about it, and of course, we went long. So with that, we are going to sign off, log off for now. You can check us out on YouTube at Speaking Llama on YouTube. Like, subscribe, do all those things. Also on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We're on Instagram at Speaking Llama. We'll be coming at you with a recap episode later this week with a special guest joining us. So be excited.
A very relevant special guest.
A very relevant special guest. So get excited for that, to be revealed later. But until next time, we'll speak Llama to you later.